Helena Petrov's hand shook so badly that the first line bled before the ink had set, a dark vein spreading across creamy morning paper and onto the cuff of the only black day dress she possessed. She lifted the page at once, as if speed could reverse clumsiness, but the stain had already flowered. From the opposite side of the escritoire, Lady Belgrave made a soft, clicking sound with her tongue, the sound she used for chipped china, bad servants, and moral disappointment. Really, Helena, if one has nothing else, one might at least cultivate neatness. Yes, ma'am. Helena folded the spoilt sheet inward so the blot would not show and reached for another. It was raining against the garret windows hard enough to rattle the leaded panes. Her attic room smelled of damp wool, old paper, and sealing wax. Below, where Lady Belgrave entertained callers in satin and perfumed coal heat, there would be lamps and hot wine and polished silver. Here there was a narrow truckle bed, her father's cracked globe with half the Atlantic peeling away, 2 chairs that did not match, and a desk inherited by no one because it had been thought too useless to claim. Helena had made it serviceable with twine, patience, and a folded shawl under the shortest leg. At 23 she had become the sort of woman people assessed in one glance and forgot in the next. Too dark of hair for the current taste, too thin of face, too solemn of eye. Her features were called severe by women who painted their softness with powder and called it nature. She was rarely invited to sit in good rooms and never to stay after tea. Yet, when candlelight struck her fully, there was a peculiar intensity in her gaze that made some men look away and some women turn cold. It was not beauty, society decided. It was something less convenient. Once, before fever took him, and lawyers took everything else, her father had filled this same house with atlases, legal folios, and long arguments at midnight. He had been no grand lord, only a solicitor with uncommon learning and impractical honesty. He had taught Helena French, Italian, double-entry bookkeeping, and ciphers, as though these were toys fit for any child with a curious mind. After his death, Lady Belgrave, widowed in all but title from affection, had moved swiftly through inventory, debt, and sympathy. The parlours remained hers. The attic became Helena's. Her board was counted as charity, her labour as gratitude. So she copied invitations for women who never thanked her, notes of condolence drafted from one stale template and signed in 12 different hands, receipts, contracts, petitions, all in a script so regular some gentlemen tipped Lady Belgrave for her efficient clerk without asking the clerk's name. Helena endured this because endurance was cheaper than the street, because there were bills with her father's signature still held by men who smiled too pleasantly, and because words, even hired words, were still words. She kept a private ledger beneath her mattress, quotations, observations, facts others edited out. Truth, she believed with the stubbornness of the dispossessed, did not vanish merely because it was unwelcome. Lady Belgrave lifted her fan and tapped the desk edge. "You may leave sentiment to those who feel it. I require polish." Helena did not look up. "For which letter, ma'am?" "For no letter, for a death." Lady Belgrave's mouth arranged itself into practised sorrow. "Lord Ashcombe's memorial service is on Thursday. The household is in confusion naturally, and his cousin has asked that suitable remarks be prepared. You were taught grammar, and Lord knows you have no other visible use." The name landed in the room like a bell struck under water. Lord Ashcombe, a duke with frost in his manners and a reputation for exacting stewardship, not beloved perhaps, but feared where fear protected the vulnerable and resented where it restrained appetite. He had vanished 6 weeks earlier on a winter crossing from Calais. No survivors, no wreckage worth naming, only rumour and black crape tied hastily over a title not yet legally buried. Helena set down her pen. "His body has not been recovered." "Bodies are often inconveniently late," Lady Belgrave replied. "Inheritance cannot be." A beat of silence stretched between them. Lady Belgrave smiled to soften what she had not troubled to hide. "Do not stare as though I have said something cruel. Great houses must continue. You will draft something elevated, reverent, and concise. Mention duty, mention the burden of rank. Avoid theology. Clergy become territorial. And who will deliver it? Perhaps Mr. Fenwick himself. Perhaps an old school friend. It scarcely matters. The words will be presentable, and they will be ready by evening. You may use the dispatch boxes in the blue room if you require facts." Her gaze moved to Helena's stained cuff with tiny disgust. "Try not to mark those papers as you do your sleeves. Some documents are valuable." When she had gone, her skirts whispering down the stairs like quiet applause for herself, Helena sat very still. Rain drummed the roof. Somewhere below, a clock struck 3 with the confidence of ownership. In the lane outside, a costermonger shouted turnips in a hoarse monotone. Life going on in vulgar indifference to dukes and their fog-bound ships. She gathered fresh quills, sand and sealing string, then went down to the blue room. It had once been her father's map room before Lady Belgrave converted it into a receiving chamber she almost never used. The walls were panelled in faded silk that had gone from sapphire to old smoke, and 2 dispatch chests sat under the window, each with brass corners and a lock too polite to deter anyone already inside the house. Helena knelt, lifted the lid of the nearest chest, and began sorting. At first she found what she expected: notices to tenants, invitations declined, trade invoices, a sheaf of speeches copied from previous bereavements, with names changed and dates altered. She read enough to feel the flatness of them, praise as generic as mourning ribbons bought by the yard. Then, at the bottom of the second chest, under a stack of unanswered calls, she found 3 letters tied in plain twine and sealed with the Ashcombe crest in black wax that had not been broken. The dates made her frown. Each was postmarked after the day the Duke was said to have drowned. She held the first to the light. The paper was thick, private, not the kind a servant would use, addressed to Lord Ashcombe's own hand at the London residence, forwarded from Dover, delayed by weather perhaps, innocent. She told herself that while her pulse climbed anyway. She broke the first seal with a hairpin and scanned quickly mundane instructions regarding rents and grain deliveries. The second referred to a meeting cancelled for reasons now obvious to both parties, then promised to burn previous correspondence. The third was shorter, cramped, and at first glance meaningless. A tidy paragraph about horses, bridge repairs, and a physician's indisposition. But certain letters stood too stiffly. Certain phrases repeated where no sane writer would repeat them. Her father's voice came back with painful clarity, amused and patient at midnight over tea gone cold. Always assume someone is listening. If you must tell the truth where liars collect, dress it as weather. Helena took scrap paper and began to mark every third letter, then every first after punctuation, then diagonal across lines. On the second attempt, sense emerged. Fenwick petitions early declaration. Trust no one in house. If I fail return, I go to ground. Threat internal. She read it twice, then a third time more slowly, as if slowness could lessen what she understood. Lord Ashcombe might be dead. He might also be alive and in hiding. In either case, someone close to him was moving to claim legal death before the statutory waiting period. That was not grief. That was appetite with stationery. Footsteps sounded in the corridor. Helena slid the decoded notes into her sleeve and laid neutral papers on top of the opened letter just as the maid Jane entered with coal. "Beg pardon, miss. Her ladyship asked if you had what you need." "I have enough," Helena said, and hoped her voice did not betray the violence in her chest. By dusk she had drafted 2 pages and destroyed 4. Each false start sounded either cowardly or suicidal. A woman in her position could not accuse a peer by name on conjecture and remain unruined. She could, however, tell the truth in a language the respectable were trained to miss unless they felt it strike home. She began again. She praised the Duke's discipline, but named the cost of discipline paid by those who kept it. She spoke of stewardship not as privilege, but as burden borne under watchful eyes, that mistake restraint for coldness. She wrote that absence reveals character most clearly in those who remain, and that there are mourners who grieve a man and mourners who grieve only delay. She wrote in a line that made her stop with the pen suspended above the page that he had worn frost-like armour because tenderness in great houses is punished first. On the surface, it was fitting. Any clergyman could read it without choking. Underneath, it was indictment. When she carried the pages downstairs, Lady Belgrave was in the drawing-room receiving Lord Fenwick, a narrow gentleman with expensive gloves and a smile that never reached the eyes it narrowed. Candles had been lit, rain shone black in the window-panes behind them. Lady Belgrave accepted the folded draft and did not offer Helena a chair. "Leave it," she said. "You may go." Fenwick turned, as if only then noticing there was a person attached to the document. "Ah, the little scholar!" His glance travelled over Helena in the way of men who inventory furniture. "Useful to have one in reach." Helena curtsied because not curtsying had consequences. As she straightened, Fenwick added lightly, "No flights, I trust. Mourners are sentimental enough without being instructed." "I wrote what was required, my lord." "I'm sure you did." He smiled again, thin as string. "People in dependent situations generally do." She withdrew before her face could answer for her. Night settled heavily over the house. Servants banked fires. Doors clicked shut, one by one. In her attic, Helena lit a single candle and copied her own draft into her private ledger from memory. Every phrase, every pressure point. If her original pages were altered, and they would be, she wanted proof of what had first been said. Near midnight there came a murmur of voices below, unfamiliar and low. Wheels in the courtyard. A man's step, measured, neither hurried nor hesitant. Helena crossed to the top landing and listened through the banisters. She could not make out words, only Lady Belgrave's honeyed tone, and then, answering it, a deeper voice roughened by weather. "Captain Grey," said the butler in announcement. The name meant nothing to her. She returned to her desk, though she did not sleep, in the Duke's London library, where dust had begun to settle as if death conferred immediate abandonment. Captain Grey stood alone before the hearth with Helena's pages in his hand. He was broad across the shoulders, coat still damp at the hem, with a pale scar cutting from his right temple toward his hairline like a half-erased stroke of chalk. He read once quickly, then again, with his thumb pressed hard against one particular line until the paper creased. Absence reveals character most clearly in those who remain. He crossed to the desk that had belonged to a dead man and placed the eulogy beside a signet ring he had not worn in public for 6 weeks. The ring caught firelight. Ashcombe's crest unmistakable. He stared at the 2 objects, as if choosing between them were a kind of sentence. From the corridor came the faint clink of glass, and Lady Belgrave's laugh, lowered for intimacy. Captain Grey did not answer when she sent a servant to ask whether he required anything. He required, he thought, a witness who could write what others feared to speak and still keep her hand steady. He read the pages a 3rd time. He did not sleep at all. At dawn, when the rain had finally spent itself into a grey, dripping hush, Captain Grey rang for Lady Belgrave before the breakfast urn was brought in. Helena heard of it because Jane came up the attic stairs, breathless, apron still in her hands. "Her ladyship says you're to come down directly," she whispered, eyes bright with servant hall alarm. "The gentleman from last night is in the morning room, and Mr. Pike says he has the air of a man who expects doors to open." Helena set aside her pen and followed, without asking questions she would not be answered. The house smelled of damp carpets and cinders. In the mirror at the half-landing she caught a brief, uncharitable glimpse of herself. Dark hair pinned too tightly, cheeks too hollow to flatter morning black. And then she was ushered in. Lady Belgrave sat on the sofa in pearl grey silk, despite the hour, as if grief were an engagement one dressed for. Captain Grey stood by the window, gloved hands clasped behind his back. In daylight he looked larger than he had seemed at midnight, less like a visitor than a man taking measure of walls. "Miss Petroff," Lady Belgrave said, in the tone of someone presenting a household object, "Captain Grey has an inconvenient quantity of estate correspondence and insists upon competent copying. I have told him my household is already overtaxed, but he appears to mistake urgency for entitlement." Grey's gaze moved to Helena. It was direct without being familiar. "Do you keep duplicates of what you copy?" he asked. The question landed like a pin dropped in quiet water. Lady Belgrave gave a tiny laugh. "How absurdly administrative! She keeps what I ask her to keep." Helena answered him, not her. "I keep what is necessary to preserve accuracy." One corner of his mouth shifted. Not quite a smile. "Good. I require accuracy." Lady Belgrave snapped open her fan, though the room was cold. "Miss Petrov may assist for 3 hours daily under supervision, and no original paper leaves this house without my approval." Grey did not look at her. "Miss Petrov will work at Ashcombe House from 10 until 4. If you wish to send a maid to watch her sharpen quills, do so. If you attempt to restrict which ledgers she sees, I will assume obstruction and speak of it plainly." Colour rose under Lady Belgrave's powder. "You forget yourself, Captain. You are here by courtesy." At that, Grey finally turned his head. His voice stayed even, but something in it made Helena think of ice cracking across a river. "No, Lady Belgrave, I remember myself very exactly." The silence that followed was long enough for Helena to hear the scrape of a coal scuttle in the corridor. Lady Belgrave shut her fan with a crack. "Very well, Helena, fetch your things. And do not imagine this arrangement improves your standing." Helena curtsied and withdrew, pulse hammering in her throat. Ashcombe House in Grosvenor Square was not shuttered for morning so much as suspended. Footmen moved softly. Carpets had been muffled. Mirrors wore black ribbon at the corners. Yet the machinery of power continued under crape. Clerks came and went, rent notices were stamped, and 2 solicitors occupied a side room from noon onward, as if paperwork could certify death by persistence. Helena was set up at a side table in the late Duke's library, close enough to the fire to keep ink fluid. Captain Grey worked at the main desk with stacks of account books, tenancy rolls, and vouchers bound in fading red tape. A maid from Lady Belgrave's household, Martha, narrow-faced and loyal to whoever paid wages, sat near the door with her sewing and watched Helena's hands more than her own needle. For the first hour, nothing happened beyond arithmetic and dust. Then Grey slid a ledger across. "Read line 23, quarter ending Michaelmas." Helena traced the column. "Repairs to east boundary wall, Ashcombe Fell, £89. Again, quarter ending Christmas." She turned pages. "Repairs to east boundary wall, Ashcombe Fell, £92. His finger tapped once on a separate bill. And this invoice, dated between those quarters, for complete rebuilding by a different mason. Paid in full." Helena looked up. "The wall has been repaired 3 times in 6 months?" "On paper," He gave her another book, Household Disbursements from the London Residents. Candles, coal, linen, wages, then large payments marked simply consultative fees, each authorised with an angular hand imitating confidence. "Compare signatures," he said. She laid 3 receipts side by side, one signed by the previous steward, one by Lord Ashcombe months earlier, one recent and suspect. The final flourish on the new entries overreached, the pressure wrong, as if the writer believed authority lived in ornament. "Not the same hand," Helena said quietly. "No." By noon she had copied a list of irregular vouchers longer than her forearm, missing rents from 3 northern farms, a charitable school allotment reduced by half while reported as increased, grain purchases billed twice and delivered once. In the margin of one ledger, next to a transfer into a private account, someone had scribbled F to B in shorthand so casual it might have passed unnoticed forever. Fenwick to Belgrave. Martha coughed meaningfully from the door. Helena bent lower over her page and wrote as if transcribing inventories of soap. At one, a luncheon tray came in untouched by appetite. Gray remained standing as he ate bread in 2 absent bites, then returned to the desk. "Did Lady Belgrave ask what I set you to copy?" he said. "Yes." "And what did you tell her?" "That there were tenancy abstracts in dreadful order. Which is true?" His eyes rested on her for a beat. "You choose your truths carefully." "I have had practice." They worked until the windows went gold with the lowering sun. As Helena packed her pages, Gray said, "Bring a different notebook tomorrow. Plain cover. Leave whatever you value least where it can be searched." She paused. "You expect my room to be searched." "I expect pressure to increase as options decrease." It was said as fact, not warning theatrics. She nodded once and left. By the 3rd day everyone had noticed. Coachmen at the Mews touched their hats with a shade too much curiosity when she arrived at Ashcombe House. A flower seller outside St. George's told another woman, not quietly, that the Duke's people keep odd company now. In Lady Belgrave's drawing-room, callers interrupted themselves when Helena entered with tea, then resumed in voices that carried just far enough. "Poor relation, I hear." "Not relation at all, my dear. Something foreign on her father's side." "They say she is useful with papers." "They always are until they begin to think themselves necessary." Lady Belgrave began requesting Helena's evenings for family duty, which meant standing by while sympathy visitors praised Belgrave composure and speculated on the settlement of Ashcombe lands. Lord Fenwick came twice in 1 week, each time smelling faintly of bergamot and triumph. He had started speaking of when matters are regularised as though regularisation were weather, inevitable and impersonal. On Friday, Lady Belgrave summoned Helena to the Blue Room and shut the door behind her. "You are becoming conspicuous," she said without preamble. "Do you know what that does to a woman with no dowry and no protector? It ruins options she cannot afford to lose." Helena kept her hands clasped so they would not betray anger. "I go where you ordered me to go." "Do not be literal. It is provincial." Lady Belgrave moved to the dispatch chest and touched the lid with 2 fingers. "You will bring me every copy you make before anyone else sees it, every sheet. If Captain Gray objects, tell him I insist for legal housekeeping. I cannot surrender private estate records to a third party." Lady Belgrave's smile thinned. "A third party? I feed you. I shelter you. I have tolerated your father's untidy debts attached to my household name for years. Do not mistake endurance for obligation in your favour." At the word debts, Helena went cold. Lady Belgrave saw it and pressed. "Mr. Alton called this morning. He still holds your father's bond for £240. Distressing sum. I might persuade him to patience, if I were so inclined. She let the fan in her hand drift open and closed like a breathing thing. Or I might mention that his debtor's daughter has lately cultivated the habit of private hours with an unmarried military gentleman in a dead duke's library. Men are so sensitive to reputation where repayment is uncertain. Helena heard, as if from far away, the rain beginning again against the window. You would circulate that? I would regretfully fail to suppress it. For one long second, Helena imagined taking the dispatch box and hurling it through the blue silk wall. Instead, she said, "What exactly do you want?" "Copies and advance notice. If there is anything touching succession, petitions, signatures, you bring it first to me. You owe me practical gratitude." "I owe you nothing that requires dishonour." Lady Belgrave's eyes hardened. "You owe me your roof." Helena left before her voice could break. That evening she did what she had done since childhood, when frightened enough to think clearly. She made columns. Names, dates, sums, discrepancies, cross-references. If Lady Belgrave wanted copies, Helena would supply copies curated like stage scenery. Enough truth to avoid suspicion. Enough omission to keep the heart of it safe. She shifted sensitive notes into a cipher her father used for game scores and recipes, knowing no one would look twice at a page titled Pickled Walnuts. Saturday brought brittle sunlight, then wind. The courtyard at Ashcombe House was crowded with comings and goings, a brewer's dray backing awkwardly toward the kitchens, 2 grooms arguing over a lame chestnut, and a hired carriage waiting for Lady Bell's maid from upstairs accounts. Helena had just stepped out under the archway with a stack of tied abstracts, when shouting split the air. "Mind the wheel! Mind!" One of the stable hands, Tom, about 19, freckled and all elbows, slipped on wet cobble as the carriage lurched. The rear wheel climbed his lower leg before the driver could haul the horses to a stop. Tom screamed once, high and raw, then went white. For a heartbeat, everyone froze. Driver cursing, grooms swearing, maid gasping with both hands over her mouth. Helena dropped the papers and ran. "Don't move him!" she snapped, kneeling in mud and wool and blood smell. "Tom, look at me! Keep looking!" He was shaking so hard his teeth clicked. The leg below the knee bent wrong under the stocking. Blood seeped where skin had split against stone. "James!" she shouted at the nearest groom. "Bring 2 stable boards, clean if you can find them, and a leather strap, not rope, strap." James stared. "Miss, the surgeon, now!" He ran. Captain Grey was beside her almost at once, coat flung open, expression sharpened to command. "What do you need?" "Space and stillness. Hold his shoulders. Don't let him thrash." Grey crouched, one hand firm at Tom's chest, the other bracing his jaw. "Tom, hear me. Breathe when she says." Tom sobbed a yes. Helena pulled off her gloves with her teeth and felt along the bone. Gentle but unflinching. Fracture likely clean, maybe not compound if we are lucky. If anyone gives him gin before we set it, I will box their ears. A footman offered a flask anyway. Grey took it from him without looking and set it aside. Boards arrived. Helena slid them on either side of the leg while Tom moaned into Grey's sleeve. "On 3, she said. "Captain, steady him. 1, 2. At 3 she drew traction and aligned the limb in one swift motion. Tom howled, then sagged near faint. She wrapped the boards tight with torn linen and the leather strap, knotting above and below the break. "Good," she murmured, more to keep him conscious than from certainty. "Good lad, stay with me." "Carriage ready," someone called. "No jostling," Helena said. 2 men, lift from hips and shoulders, keep the leg level. Send for Mr. Harris immediately and tell him splint applied before transport." When they carried Tom away, the courtyard exhaled all at once into noise. Questions, praise, panic, delayed. Helena sat back on her heels, hands slick with blood and mud, and only then realised her heart was pounding in her ears hard enough to blur sound. Captain Grey was still crouched opposite her. His face, usually composed to opacity, was stripped bare by something like astonishment. "You've done that before," he said. "My father treated clerks who could not pay physicians," Helena replied, breathless. "I held lamps." "That wasn't lamp-holding." "No." She wiped her wrists with the ruined hem of her petticoat. "It was remembering." He stood and offered her his hand up. She took it. As she rose, his glove had been removed at some point and tucked into his belt. Mud streaked his cuff. A dark old scar marked his knuckles. And on his right hand, plain in the pale afternoon, was a heavy signet ring bearing Ashcombe's crest. Not a copy. Not an heir's variation. The true die worn at the edges exactly where generations had turned it. Helena's fingers tightened involuntarily around his. He felt it. Their eyes met. For a second the courtyard noise fell away, the world narrowing to ring, scar, breath. She let go at once. "Miss Petroff," he said quietly. "I need clean water," she answered, because there were 20 people watching, and because if she spoke one word more she might say his title in open air. She waited until evening, not because she feared him, though she did a little, but because accusation without privacy was another form of stupidity. She finished the day's copying with mechanical precision, blotted, sanded, tied. At 6:30, Martha was called away to carry a message for Lady Belgrave. Helena took the chance, gathered the most innocuous ledger, and crossed to the inner library, where Grey had gone. He stood by the fire with his back to her, reading her latest abstract. The ring flashed once as he turned a page. "Captain Grey," she said. Her voice was too calm. "How should I address a dead man?" He did not start. He set the papers down, then faced her fully. "You should shut the door first," he said. She did. When she turned back, he had removed the ring and placed it on the desk between them, as one might lay down a weapon before parley. "My name is Elias Northcott," he said, "Duke of Ashcombe." The room seemed to tilt and steady again. "You staged your death." "I staged my disappearance. Death was supplied by rumour and embraced by people who found it useful." Helena heard her own pulse in her throat. "Why?" "Because I learned 3 days before Calais that Fenwick had drafted a petition for early declaration of death in my absence, and had already lined signatures among 2 trustees and a magistrate in Surrey who owes him money. If I returned openly, I'd flush no one. If I vanished, they would move. And they did. They have." His mouth hardened, faster than I expected. She looked at the ring, then at him. Scar at the temple, the same measured step on the stair, the same voice she had heard below the banister that night. "You read the eulogy. All of it." Heat rose up her neck, anger and mortification braided together. "Then you know I used your memorial to accuse your household of carrion behaviour while uncertain whether you breathed. I know you told the truth under constraints designed to prevent it." He moved closer, by 1 pace, no more. "I know one line kept me awake until dawn." She could not help it. "Which line?" His gaze did not leave hers. "That I wore frost like armour, because tenderness in great houses is punished first." Silence opened between them, raw and bright. "I nearly struck it out," she said. "I'm glad you did not." She folded her hands to still them. "What do you want from me, Your Grace?" "First, In this house, until I say otherwise, you will continue to call me Captain Grey. Second, I want you beside me when I end this. At the memorial. Yes, he nodded once. Fenwick intends to use it as public staging for succession sympathy. Lady Belgrave is collecting allies by teacup. If I appear without preparation, they will call me imposter, madman, blackmailer, anything that buys an hour. Rank alone won't settle it quickly enough. Your documents, your copies, your records of alteration, those make lies expensive. Helena let out a breath she had not noticed she was holding. You are asking me to stand in a church full of people who already think me grasping and announce that I have been helping a living duke expose his cousin and my guardian. I am asking because you can do it cleanly. A flicker, almost regret, crossed his face, and because they will attack you whether you help or not. Better to choose the ground. She laughed once without humour. There is no safe ground for women like me. I did not say safe. He was not offering rescue. He was offering partnership in risk. The distinction mattered enough to hurt. Helena went to the desk, drew the ring closer with one finger, and set it back where it had been, exactly centred on a knot in the wood. Then we do it properly, she said. Not with grand gestures, with sequence. Some tension left his shoulders, replaced by focus. Tell me. First, we secure originals away from both houses. Second, we make 3 copy sets, one for your solicitor, one for neutral custody, one for immediate use if papers go missing. Third, we bait Lady Belgrave with harmless material so she believes she is ahead of us. Fourth, I revise the memorial text into 2 versions. 2? One she expects, Helena said. One she deserves. For the first time he smiled outright, brief, astonished, almost young. Miss Petrov, he said, I begin to understand why my enemies are uneasy. She met his gaze steadily now, fear transmuting into a sharper thing. Your Grace, she replied, you are no longer being eulogized, you are being briefed. Outside, carriage wheels hissed on wet street stones. Inside, by the fire of a dead man's library, Helena pulled a clean sheet toward her, dipped her pen, and began drafting not an epitaph, but a strategy. The nib scratched fast under Helena's hand as she built columns across fresh foolscap, document/date/hand/witness/duplicate location. Elias, Captain Grey, while Walls still listened, dictated names of clerks and tenants who could verify receipts. They spoke in low, practical tones, as if planning winter stores, not a public detonation. By the time the first sheet was full, the lamps in the library had been lit, and the house had settled into that peculiar evening hush where every small sound carried. Helena had just reached for a second quire when the door opened without knocking. Martha stood there, out of breath, cap askew. Miss Petrov, your maid's come from Belgrave House. Says it cannot wait. Jane appeared behind her, cheeks raw from the wind, apron thrown over a shawl. She saw Elias and faltered, then thrust a folded note toward Helena. It's your room, miss. Her ladyship had Mr. Pike and 2 men up there with keys. They've turned everything. Helena broke the seal. Lady Belgrave's hand, elegant and acid. As you seem lately confused regarding obligations, I have secured your papers for safekeeping. Mr. Alton was kind enough to remind me your father's bond matures now, not later. Return directly. Bring every Ashcombe copy in your possession. Delay will be interpreted as theft. At the bottom, a postscript. Lord Fenwick calls at 9. The room narrowed. Helena looked to Elias. He was already pulling on his gloves. We go now, he said. Lady Belgrave received them in the blue room, where the dispatch chests sat open like mouths. Mr. Alton, thin and clerical, with a creditor's patient eyes, stood by the mantel, holding a leather case. Helena's attic key lay on the table beside her own emptied notebook covers. Lady Belgrave did not rise. "How good of you to come! Captain, I was unaware you escorted household dependents after dark." "I escort evidence," Elias said. Her smile sharpened. "Evidence of what?" "Ingratitude." Helena crossed to the table and lifted one cover. The stitched spine had been cut, pages gone. "My private ledger," she said. "Your private habit of duplication, rather." Lady Belgrave fluttered her fan. "I cannot have estate papers copied into who knows what personal journals. It suggests intent to extort." "Mr." Alton opened the leather case and produced a folded document. "Miss Petroff, as to your late father's obligation, £240 principal, with accrued interest and fees." "Not tonight," Elias said. Alton gave him a stiff, offended look. "Debts are rarely convenient, sir." Lady Belgrave leaned back. "Convenience is exactly the question. Lord Fenwick has informed me that irregularities in Ashcombe books may soon become a legal matter. If unauthorised copies circulate, the person in possession appears culpable. Imagine my distress were Helena entangled." Helena met her gaze. "You searched my room to protect me?" "I searched my house to protect my name." Lady Belgrave's voice dropped, silk over wire. "You will hand over every page you made at Ashcombe House. In return, I will speak to Mr. Alton about patience and to certain ladies about discretion. Refuse, and by tomorrow you are a debtor and a thief with a military lover. Society is very efficient at combining those stories." Elias stepped forward. Helena touched his sleeve before he could answer. If he pressed too hard now, he would reveal too much too soon. She said, "You may have routine abstracts. Nothing more." Lady Belgrave's eyes flickered. Calculation, then satisfaction at what she took for concession. "Sensibly done." Fenwick arrived before they left, announced with unnecessary volume by the butler. He entered in black broadcloth, gloves pearl grey, his expression all condoling concern until he saw Helena with Elias. Then the concern cooled. "Captain Grey," he said lightly, "still indefatigable. Miss Petroff, I hear you have a remarkable appetite for ledgers." "Someone must," Helena replied. Fenwick laughed as if she had entertained him. "Do take care. Numbers can be misread by eager minds. One does hate to see confusion become accusation." He turned to Alton. "Ah, you've called? Efficient fellow." Alton inclined his head. "Matters proceed." As Helena followed Elias out, she caught Fenwick's final glance toward her. Quick, proprietary, and utterly sure of eventual victory. In the carriage back to Grosvenor Square, neither spoke for half the journey. At last Elias said, "He's moving faster. If he secures a civil complaint against you first, he taints every document you touched." "What will be lost if he does?" Helena asked, though she knew. "Your freedom, my estate, the tenants' schools, winter coal contracts, every dependent household he can sell off in parcels while litigation drags." His jaw tightened. "And the truth, if we cannot place it before neutral eyes in time." Helena stared at her ink-stained fingers in the lamplight. "Then we place it tonight." They chose Mr. Harbury, a solicitor known less for brilliance than for caution, precisely why Helena trusted him. Cautious men liked stamped receipts and proper chains of custody. They prepared a packet of the most damaging material, copied vouchers, signature comparisons, rent diversions, and Helena's cipher transcription of the posthumous letters. Originals stayed hidden in Ashcombe's old gun cabinet behind an accounting folio no thief would touch. At 11, Elias sent a trusted footman with the sealed packet and instructions for hand delivery. At midnight, the footman returned alone, pale. "Mr. Harbury refused it, sir. Said he cannot receive disputed property without court leave. Said there's already a complaint filed this evening naming Miss Petrov as having removed estate papers unlawfully under your instruction." "By whom?" Elias asked, though again they knew. "Lord Fenwick's solicitor, sir, and—" The footman swallowed. "2 Bow Street men came through while I waited. Asked whether a Captain Grey resides here under false name." For a moment Helena heard only the fire settling in the grate. Elias took the packet back, unbroken. "Thank you, Thomas. Go sleep." When the door shut, he said, "He's done it. Theft complaint against you, imposture inquiry against me." Helena sat down because her knees had gone uncertain. "Can they arrest me?" "For debt, yes. For theft, if he persuades a magistrate there's risk of destruction." Elias crossed to the desk, spread the packet contents, and began sorting with precise, furious movements. "He wants us discredited before Thursday. If he can keep you from the lectern and me from legal recognition through the memorial, he gets interim control." They worked until the sky began to pale. At dawn, they heard boots in the hall and men's voices not belonging to Ashcombe servants. Inspector Hale of Bow Street entered with 2 officers and a warrant. He was civil, heavy-lidded, and careful to read each line aloud. "By complaint of Lord Fenwick regarding suspected embezzlement and alteration of estate records," he said, "we are authorised to inspect and remove relevant ledgers for magistrate review." Helena stood very straight. "Do you have warrant to search my person?" "No, miss." "Then you will not touch my pockets." Hale gave a brief nod. "No one touches the lady." They took 7 ledgers, 3 voucher books, and 2 dispatch bundles. Hale listed each item as it left the room. The cipher letter originals were not among them. Those remained hidden. But when Helena checked her satchel after the officers were gone, the folded comparison sheet she had prepared, the one matching Fenwick's forged signature stroke by stroke, had vanished. Not misplaced. Gone. Martha had been at the door half the morning. Helena sank into the chair she had occupied for days and pressed both hands to her eyes. "He doesn't need all of it," she whispered, "only enough to muddy every page." Elias knelt in front of her, forcing her to lower her hands. "Look at me." She did. "This is a setback," he said, "not an ending." "Easy to say when your name can still open doors." His expression flickered hurt and truth both. "My name is presently a corpse and a rumour." She laughed once, then covered her mouth. It came out too close to a sob. "I cannot even go home. She has my room key, my notebooks. If I step into Belgrave House, she will have me watched. If I do not, I am truant under her roof, and she calls Alton." He rose and turned away, hand flat against the mantel, as if containing himself by force. By afternoon, the consequences spread exactly as Fenwick intended. 2 tenants sent notes asking whether Ashcombe rents should now be paid to Fenwick's office until legal certainty. A printer's boy was seen in the square distributing handbills hinting at female interference in noble accounts. Harbury sent a second letter advising Helena, blandly, to avoid public assertions which may prejudice proceedings. By evening, Elias had lost immediate control of his own books, and Helena had lost the shelter of invisibility that had once protected her. They had not merely been delayed, they had been repositioned onto ground chosen by their enemies. No one solved it that night. Long after Helena had been settled into the small upstairs room at Ashcombe House, under protest because propriety could drown for all she cared, and still she cared, Elias remained in the dark library with only banked coals and 1 candle guttering low. He loosened his collar, sat at the dead man's desk that was his own, and let the mask slip because there was no one to reward composure. Fenwick's theft complaint lay open before him. Beside it, Helena's eulogy draft, folded and refolded until the edges had gone soft. He had thought when he planned his disappearance that he understood sacrifice in the abstract. Endure discomfort, watch from shadows, wait for greed to show itself. He had not factored in Helena Petrov, kneeling in a courtyard with blood to her elbows, or standing in his library refusing to flatter him, or being named thief because he had asked for her mind. He had put her in the line of fire, and then admired her for not burning. A soft knock came. Briggs, his oldest valet, stepped in carrying a tray no one would touch. "You've not eaten, Your Grace." "Don't," Elias said tiredly. "Not tonight." Briggs set the tray down anyway. He had dressed Elias since boyhood and did not startle at titles spoken or denied. "Word from the Muse is ugly. Men talk. They'll talk worse by morning." "I know," Briggs hesitated. "Then perhaps call it off. Reveal yourself to the papers, not the church. Keep the lady out of it." Elias stared at the coal glow. "If I reveal without her evidence, Fenwick calls me an impostor and buys experts to swear signatures true. We spend months in court while he strips the estate. School stipends halt. Coal contracts fail. Tenants choose whichever collector appears with legal stationery." He shut his eyes briefly, and Helena is still ruined because he has already named her. Briggs said nothing. After a moment, Elias added, voice rougher, "When my father died, I promised I would never again mistake control for safety. I have done exactly that. I controlled the board. I did not protect the pieces." Briggs's face softened with an old sorrow. "You were 21, and burying a duke who taught you affection was leverage." "That is not absolution." Elias picked up Helena's draft, thumb finding the familiar line by memory. "Tenderness in great houses is punished first." "I made myself into Frost because it worked. Efficient, unassailable. And now the one person who wrote me as human may pay for it." He set the paper down before his grip tore it. "I am afraid," he said quietly, as if testing whether the room would collapse around the admission, "not of Fenwick, of failing her in public where everyone can watch." Briggs drew a breath, then another. "Then don't fail, but eat first." A huff of unwilling laughter escaped Elias, broken but real. He took a bite of cold bread because obedience tonight was easier than courage. When Briggs had gone, Elias pulled a fresh sheet and wrote 2 letters, one to Inspector Hale requesting his presence at Street, George's in anticipation of fraud and breach of peace, and one to Helena he did not send, beginning and ending 3 different ways before tearing each attempt in half. At last he wrote only, "I cannot ask less of you than I ask of myself. If you choose to step back, I will not hold you." He sealed it, then sat with it in his hand until dawn stained the windows and the wax had gone hard. He kept the letter. Morning came brittle and bright, church bells carrying through cold air like warnings. The memorial was at 11. At 8, before Helena could dress, Pike arrived at Ashcombe House with a message from Lady Belgrave with urgency regarding Miss Petrov's personal obligations. Elias wanted him thrown out. Helena asked for the note. Inside was a single line. "Your father's account book is in my possession. Attend me by 9 or lose it." Helena's breath caught. Her father's account book, if Lady Belgrave truly had it, contained old entries in his hand, including private loans to Fenwick predating the estate manipulations. Not conclusive alone, but a bridge between motives and present fraud. And in Lady Belgrave's own threat to use the debt bond lay the reason she feared that book. "I have to go," Helena said. "No," Elias said at once. "It's a trap." "Of course it is. But if she burns that ledger, we lose one of the few papers no one can claim I forged yesterday." He swore under his breath, then rang for carriage and 2 footmen. Belgrave House was all mourning drapery and polished hostility when Helena entered. Lady Belgrave waited in the morning room with a folded speech on the table, and Mr. Alton seated beside the fire like an undertaker at hire. "You are punctual," Lady Belgrave said. "Encouraging. Where is the account book?" "Later." She tapped the folded pages. "First, practicalities. You will read this version at St. George's. Warm, restrained, entirely non-inflammatory. No references to opportunists, carrion, or whatever else you fancied in your original vulgarity." Helena did not touch the pages. "And if I decline—" Alton opened his leather case and withdrew the debt bond, complete with Helena's father's signature and 3 endorsements. "Then I execute immediately, miss. Debtors holding by noon. As for theft allegations, Lord Fenwick's solicitor is prepared to assist." Lady Belgrave leaned in. "You overestimated your leverage. You have no papers that matter now. The magistrate has the books. Harbury has refused you. Society believes what is easiest. What remains is whether you would like to remain employable after today." A knock at the inner door. Jane slipped in, eyes down, carrying a tray she did not set down. Lady Belgrave waved impatiently. "Leave us!" Jane bobbed and turned. As she passed Helena, the edge of a small packet brushed Helena's palm, quick as breath. Helena closed her fingers without looking. Lady Belgrave stood. "Take the speech." Helena did. She slid the softened pages into her reticule. With her other hand, hidden by her shawl, she felt the packet Jane had given. Worn leather, ledger size cut down, tied with kitchen string. Her father's account book. Lady Belgrave escorted her to the hall personally, all gracious composure for the servants watching. At the door she murmured so low only Helena heard, "Remember, child, one improvisation and Alton proceeds publicly." In the carriage back to St. George's, Helena untied the packet with shaking hands. Her father's cramped figures stared up at her, ink browned with age. Tucked inside the cover was a newer slip in Jane's hand, found in her ladyship's escritoire. She means to show bond in church. When Helena reached the vestry entrance, Elias was waiting in black coat and plain cravat, the face of Captain Grey fixed back into place. Inspector Hale stood farther down the corridor with 2 officers in dark greatcoats speaking to the verger. Their presence might be protection, it might be too little. Inside the nave, the congregation was already filling, peers in mourning bands, creditors, distant cousins, women with damp eyes and sharp ears. At the front, Fenwick moved between pews, receiving condolences as if receiving homage. Lady Belgrave swept in moments later and took her seat where all could see her. She met Helena's eyes once and touched the reticule at her own wrist, where the outline of a folded bond showed through silk. Elias leaned close. "Can you do this?" Helena looked at the softened speech in her hand, then at the original pages hidden beneath her shawl, then at the worn ledger against her ribs. "I can," she said. The verger opened the chancel gate. "Miss Petroff," he whispered, "you're to the lectern now." Helena stepped into the chancel light with the hush of 400 held breaths pressing against her skin. St. George's smelled of beeswax, damp wool, lilies beginning to sweeten toward rot. Black silk shifted in the pews like dark water. At the front, Lord Fenwick stood with his head bowed in a posture of grief so practised it might have been engraved. Lady Belgrave sat 3 rows back, gloved hands folded over her reticule, face composed into maternal sorrow. The verger adjusted the lectern lamp and withdrew. Helena unfolded the pages in her hands. Not Lady Belgrave's softened speech, her own. For one flicker of a second she saw the nearest faces register surprise at the length of the text, then polite impatience. She set her fingers flat to stop their shaking and began, "We gather in the name of loss." she read, her voice carrying clear into the rafters, and discover, as we always do, that loss is not an equal tutor. Some are instructed toward humility, some toward hunger. A rustle moved through the congregation. She did not pause. She spoke of duty as burden, of stewardship as sleepless arithmetic, of a man judged cold by those who never had to refuse themselves for others' sake. She spoke of absence, revealing the quality of those who remained. She spoke exactly as written of mourners who grieved a man and mourners who grieved only delay. There are houses where tenderness is punished first. She heard a sharp intake from somewhere behind Fenwick, then the scrape of a pew as someone half rose and sat again. Fenwick's head lifted. Lady Belgrave's fan stopped moving. Helena felt the weight of them both and read on, each word steadier than the last because the fear had gone through her and out. By the final paragraph, the church was no longer politely listening. It was watching. She set down the last page. Silence rang. Then she said very clearly, "If any among you still wishes to mourn Lord Ashcombe, you may do so to his face." Gasps tore loose across the nave. From the side aisle, where mourning drapery cast deep shadow, Elias stepped into full light. No disguise now, no cap pulled low. Black coat, Ashcombe signet visible, scar at the temple like a seal no forger could plan. He walked to the chancel rail and stopped. Not dramatic, simply undeniable. For one heartbeat, no one moved. Then sound broke open all at once. Cries, exclamations, a woman fainting, men shouting. Impossible! Good God! Is it truly? Fenwick surged forward first, colour draining, then flooding back red. Imposture! He barked. This is a trick. Seize that man! No one seized Elias. Inspector Hale, already near the transept as Elias had arranged, took 2 steps toward the aisle and raised his voice. "Stand where you are, my lord." Lady Belgrave rose hard enough to knock her prayer book to the floor. "That woman has engineered this," she cried, pointing at Helena. "She is under debt and theft complaint. She has stolen papers and conspired with a pretender. Mr. Alton, tell them." Alton, pale but eager, held up the folded bond. "Miss Petrov's father died indebted. She has motive beyond question." The congregation, hungry for fresh scandal, pivoted from wonder toward accusation in a single collective turn. Helena saw it happen, the way uncertainty seeks the nearest woman and calls her culprit. She stepped down from the lectern before anyone could command her there. "Yes," she said, loud enough to cut through the noise. "Produce the bond." Alton blinked, thrown by agreement. What?" "Produce it. Here." She held out her hand. Lady Belgrave snapped. "Don't be absurd." "Produce it," Helena repeated, eyes on Alton. Perhaps it was her tone. Perhaps it was that everyone was watching and refusal would look like weakness. Alton walked forward and put the bond into her hand with a look of offended superiority. Helena unfolded it once, scanned the endorsements, then looked up at Inspector Hale. "You have heard allegation of debt," she said. "Not dispute. I acknowledge it existed. What I dispute is coercion and fraudulent use of that debt to force suppression of estate evidence." "By whom?" Hale asked. "By Lady Belgrave and Lord Fenwick, in concert." Outrage detonated anew. Fenwick laughed, sharp and disbelieving. "On what basis? Your attic fancies?" Helena reached into her shawl and drew out the worn, cut-down ledger Jane had slipped her. The leather was cracked, the corners blunted from years of use. She held it as if it were a lantern. "On this basis," she said, "my father's account book, kept in his hand, removed from my effects by Lady Belgrave this morning." Lady Belgrave's composure fractured. "A lie." "Is it?" Helena flipped to a marked page. "Entry 11 years ago. Advance to AF against note. Witness J. Alton. Amount £100, renewed twice, never repaid. She turned the book toward Alton. Your initials in the margin, sir. Do you deny them? Alton went very still. I do not recollect. Then recollect this. Helena turned 2 pages. Entry 9 years ago. Lady B requested transfer of debtor notice from Miss H.P. to household account for appearance only, to be reinstated at convenience. Your initials again. A murmur rolled through the pews, lower and uglier than before. Fenwick took a step forward, voice rising. Even if true, ancient private loans have no bearing on Ashcombe's succession. This is diversion. Not diversion, Helena said. Motive. She set the ledger on the rail, opened her reticule and withdrew 3 folded sheets. Her copied signature comparisons, reconstructed from memory through the night, the cipher key, and one of the posthumous letters. These vouchers, she said, holding up the comparison sheet, bear forged authorization. The same overreaching terminal stroke appears in Lord Fenwick's hand on this petition draft for early declaration. She turned to the congregation. I copied both. I also retained 3 letters addressed to Lord Ashcombe, dated after his reported death, one in cipher warning of internal threat, and naming Lord Fenwick's petition. Fenwick's face changed. Not guilt exactly, but calculation of exits. Fabrications by a disgruntled dependent. Helena did not look at him. She looked instead to the south transept, where a thin man in spectacles had half hidden behind a column since the reveal. Mr. Harbury, she called. You refused to receive my packet last night, absent proper chain of custody. You were right. Please come forward now and verify this hand in public. All heads turned. Harbury, trapped by his own caution and by ranked witnesses on every side, could not refuse without forfeiting his profession. He approached, took the ledger with obvious reluctance, and peered down. Is this your hand, Mr. Alton? Helena asked. Harbury glanced at Alton, then back at the page. The initials appear consistent with documents I have seen in Mr. Alton's practice. Yes. And these entries naming advances to Lord Fenwick? They are contemporaneous to the page, Harbury said. Sweat stood along his hairline. Ink, age and flow suggest no recent insertion. Lady Belgrave lunged for recovery. Old domestic accounts prove nothing of current fraud. She still stole estate papers. Helena turned to Inspector Hale. Your officers removed ledgers from Ashcombe House at dawn under complaint. Please ask what prompted the complaint's timing. Hale's heavy-lidded gaze moved to Fenwick. My lord, Fenwick spread his hands, prompted by concern for irregularities, naturally. Before or after you learned Miss Petrov had copied your vouchers? Helena asked. His jaw tightened. I learned no such thing. She held up one small folded scrap, the one notation she had copied exactly before it disappeared from her satchel. Then you cannot explain why this memorandum F to B in margin beside private transfer was removed from my bag during your allies' surveillance and not from any official ledger seized by officers. Martha, near the side door among servants, flinched so visibly half the knave saw it. Hale saw it too. Bring that maid, he said to one officer. Martha stumbled forward, white as plaster. Hale asked one question. Did anyone instruct you to take papers from Miss Petrov's effects? She stared at Lady Belgrave, then at Fenwick, then at the crowd that could no longer be managed. Her ladyship said only to look for copies. Lord Fenwick said if I found anything marked against him, I was to bring it direct. Enough, Fenwick shouted. This is intimidation. No, Hale said, and his voice cracked across the nave like a gavel. This is testimony. Elias stepped to Helena's side at last, not ahead of her, and spoke to Hale with court-flat clarity. Inspector, I identify myself as Elias Northcott, Duke of Ashcombe. I make formal complaint of fraud, attempted unlawful succession petition, and evidence tampering. I request immediate custody of Lord Fenwick and Lady Belgrave, pending magistrate hearing." Fenwick sneered. "On whose authority? A man presumed dead and a clerk?" "On mine," said another voice, old and resonant from the front pew. The Bishop of Winchester's brother, Lord Tenter, one of Ashcombe's trustees and not easily bought, rose with visible effort. "I knew the Duke's father 40 years. I know that ring, that scar, and that damned stubborn posture. If there is to be inquiry, let it begin with those who hurried burial before law." The balance tipped. Hale nodded once to his men. "Lord Fenwick, Lady Belgrave, you will come with us." Lady Belgrave recoiled. "You cannot lay hands on me in church." "I can," Hale said, "and I would prefer not to drag." Fenwick tried one last angle, voice silky again. "Inspector, if you arrest me now and this proves theatrical nonsense, you end your career." Hale's mouth twitched without humour. "Then let us all hope Miss Petroff has copied accurately." When the officers moved in, Fenwick jerked free once, nearly wrenching his arm from its socket. "This is not finished," he spat at Helena. "You think one speech makes you untouchable." Helena met his fury with the calm she had bought dearly. "No, my lord. I think records make me difficult to erase." Lady Belgrave did not struggle physically. She turned her face toward the pews, toward women who had borrowed her calling cards, and men who had dined at her table, searching for an ally. None met her eyes. As Hale escorted them up the centre aisle, whispers surged like wind through dry leaves. Some shocked, some gleeful, some already revising memory so they had always suspected. Helena stood where she was until the doors shut behind the officers and the sound of boots faded to stone silence. Only then did she realise she was trembling from wrist to shoulder. Elias looked at her, the whole church still buzzing around them, and said under his breath, "You held." "So did you," she answered, though her throat burned. "No," he said, "I followed." They were not granted peace immediately. In the vestry the clergy argued jurisdiction, the trustees demanded signatures, and half the city seemed to press at the church doors for confirmation that the dead Duke had walked in at his own memorial. Hale took statements at a side table, while ink froze in poorly warmed bottles. Harbury requested copies, then requested more copies when he saw Helena's ordering system. By 2 o'clock, Fenwick had already lodged protest through his solicitor from custody. False identification, malicious conspiracy, extorted testimony from servants. Lady Belgrave, equally swift, claimed weakness and requested carriage arrest to preserve female delicacy. Hale declined both requests and asked for written rebuttal by sunset. Helena sat down at the vestry desk, spread fresh paper, and began. She wrote a timeline first. Discovery of letters, dates of copying, Lady Belgrave's threats, room search, complaint filing hour, seizure at dawn, missing comparison sheet, recovery of father's ledger. Then she attached exhibits by number and witness. Jane's note became Exhibit K. Martha's statement became Exhibit M. She wrote until her fingers cramped and asked for more sand. Elias came and went around her, recognised by trustees, challenged by opportunists, embraced by 2 old retainers who wept openly into their cuffs. Each time he returned, he found her still writing. At one point, he set a cup of tea near her elbow. "Drink. I will, when the sequence closes." "Helena." She looked up. His face was drawn with fatigue and something close to awe. "If you collapse now, Fenwick's counsel will call it feminine hysteria and discount every line." She took the cup, drank half, and kept writing. Near dusk, Hale returned from magistrate chambers with mud on his boots and a thinner patience than before. Both remanded pending full hearing, he said. Fenwick's man argued political embarrassment. Magistrate asked whether embarrassment invalidates ledgers. It does not. Relief hit Helena so hard she had to grip the table edge. Hale added, less formally, "You built this case for me, miss. Saves trouble when victims do their sums." "Thank you, Inspector." He tipped his head. "Don't thank yet. Trials are long and liars are inventive." "I know." When he had gone, the vestry emptied by degrees. Trustees dispersed to write letters. Harbury vanished with copies under his coat like a man carrying hot coals. Jane slipped in once to squeeze Helena's shoulder and whisper, "Tom'll keep his leg," before disappearing again into service corridors. At last only Helena and Elias remained. The lamps had burned low. Outside, evening rain began, soft at first, then steady on slate. Helena put down her pen and stared at the blotter, suddenly unable to move. "It is done," Elias said. "It has started," she corrected. He leaned against the opposite table, close enough she could see the threadbare edge at his cuff where morning sleeves had been altered in haste. "How do you feel?" She laughed faintly. "Like someone removed my skeleton and replaced it with piano wire." A shadow of a smile touched him and faded. "When I stepped into that aisle, I was certain I was prepared. I was not. You were. I was terrified. So was I." The admission settled between them, gentle and enormous. Helena flexed her ink-stained fingers. "If I go back to Belgrave House tonight, she'll have barred me. If I do not, society will invent reasons." "Let society exercise its imagination," he said. "You're not going back there." She met his eyes. "Careful. That sounded like rescue." "It was an offer of practical lodging," he said dryly, "with lockable drawers and witnesses enough to satisfy bishops." Despite everything, she smiled. Outside bells rang 6. The day that had begun in blackmail and threat ended with legal custody and a stack of statements taller than the tea tray. The world had not become safe, but it had changed its axis. 3 weeks later, in Ashcombe House's library, snowlight lay pale on the carpets, and the fire snapped bright in the grate. The first hearing had gone in their favour. The second would determine penalties. Fenwick remained in Newgate on fraud charges after 2 clerks corroborated altered vouchers. Lady Belgrave, denied access to Helena's rooms and papers, had sent 3 notes in 3 increasingly imploring tones, all unanswered. Helena sat at the side table balancing school disbursements against coal invoices. Spectacles perched low on her nose because she refused headaches for vanity. Elias stood at the window with an unopened letter in hand. "You are frowning at that envelope as if it insulted your horse," she said, without looking up. "It is from my aunt in Kent. She wishes to discuss appropriate gratitude toward the young lady who assisted in this unfortunate inconvenience." Helena's pen paused. "Appropriate gratitude. Likely in the form of jewels, patronage, and subtle exile." She set down the pen. "And what do you wish?" Elias turned. No witnesses, no trustees, no masks required. "I wish," he said carefully, "to stop speaking around the edge of this." Her pulse gave one hard beat. "Then don't," she said. He crossed to the desk but did not touch it, as if approaching skittish truth. "The night before the memorial I wrote you a letter I never sent. It said you could step back and I would not hold you. That was true. It was not complete." "What was missing?" "That I did not want you to step back. That every hour you were out of my sight I calculated what it would cost if I had asked too much." His voice roughened. That when Fenwick named you in his complaint, I would have traded title, estate, all of it, to undo the risk to you. Helena held his gaze. Do you know what frightened me most? Not prison, not gossip, that after all this you might return to Frost and call it prudence. He shut his eyes briefly. I have lived as a winter man because winter obeys rules. You do not obey the rules that keep people manageable. No, she said, I do not. A breath, then he said it plain. I love you, Helena. No title, no ornament, just fact, offered like a hand held out over deep water. She felt, absurdly, the same trembling she had felt before the lectern, except now there was no crowd to perform for, no enemies to outmanoeuvre, only choice. She rose. I love you too, she said, but hear me before you decide that means possession. His mouth almost curved. I had hoped it meant negotiation. It means I will not be hidden as your rescue project, nor displayed as your moral trophy. I want paid work in the Ashcombe School's accounts until I choose otherwise. I want my own correspondence, my own lock, my own right to disagree with you in rooms where men outrank me and assume silence. You already disagree in those rooms. I intend to continue. Good, he said, and now there was unmistakable warmth in his eyes. Anything else? Yes. She stepped closer. When you are frightened, do not retreat into command and call it efficiency. Tell me. He exhaled a laugh that sounded half like relief and half like surrender. That clause is unreasonable. Accept or decline? I accept. He sobered. My terms, then. When you're carrying everyone else's weight and pretending it costs nothing, you tell me before the wire snaps. She considered. Accepted. They stood within arm's reach, both smiling now in that astonished way of people who have survived the worst and still found more to risk. Elias reached up slowly, giving her time to refuse, and touched a strand of hair escaped near her temple. May I court you properly? What does properly mean to a man who returned from his own funeral? Fewer funerals, he said, more walks. Letters not about fraud. Dinner where no one threatens debtor's prison between courses. Ambitious? Also, he added, voice low, marriage. Not instantly, not as payment, as partnership, if you will have it. Helena did not answer at once. She looked past him to the desk where her first eulogy lay, folded in a drawer he had never bothered to hide from her. The words that were meant to bury him, the words that had found him. When she looked back, her eyes were clear. I will have it, she said, in spring, quietly. And if anyone asks whether I married above myself, I shall tell them I married laterally, toward the truth. He laughed helplessly, and then she was in his arms and he was kissing her, with no audience to impress, no urgency except joy delayed too long. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. You realise my aunt will call you alarming. She has excellent judgment. Spring came with thawed roads and damp earth smell rising from every square. On an April morning bright enough to make the city seem briefly innocent, Helena stood in the Ashcombe schoolroom, with sleeves rolled to the elbow, listening as Mr. Pike, promoted from butler's assistant to school steward under her ruthless books, explained why chalk expenses had tripled in Lent. Because boys eat it when dared, Pike said mournfully. Then we budget for dare, Helena replied, writing the figure, and lock the better sticks. At the back table, Tom, the former stable lad, leg mended though still stiff in wet weather, sorted slates for younger pupils, and grinned when she caught him stealing a bit of chalk for pocket use. Miss Petrov, beg pardon, Mrs. Northcote-to-be, called Jane from the doorway, wind-blown and triumphant. Bath posts arrived. Helena broke the seal as children recited multiplication in uneven chorus. Lady Belgrave's hand, still elegant, still edged, now threaded with necessity. The house in Bath proves smaller than anticipated, and my maid has absconded. If you are minded to civility, you might recommend a reliable woman. Helena folded the letter without reply and set it beneath the ledger. "Bad news, miss?" Jane asked. "Not bad," Helena said, "merely diminished." From the corridor came Elias's voice in conversation with the schoolmaster, warm, unhurried. He entered carrying a parcel wrapped in brown paper and bowed to the children as solemnly as if they were Parliament. "Delivery for the accounts tyrant," he announced. Helena opened it. New ledgers, calf-bound, initials tooled in gold at the corners. H.P.N. by her own insistence. "You remembered," she said softly. "I fear you daily, and therefore remember everything," he said, earning a scandalized giggle from the older girls who had begun to suspect romance where adults thought themselves discreet. That afternoon, in the small chapel on the Ashcombe estate, rather than any grand London church, they married with only a handful present. Jane crying openly, Tom standing as witness with polished boots and a repaired gait, Briggs pretending not to wipe his eyes, Inspector Hale in the back pew by invitation, uncomfortable in ceremony but immovable in loyalty once given. No diamonds, no orchestra, just vows spoken clear and equal. When it was done, Elias offered Helena his arm. She took it not because she needed support, but because she chose the contact, and they walked out into sun and wet grass, and the clatter of schoolchildren released for the day. That evening, after congratulations had dwindled and the house had gone quiet, Helena entered the library that had once held a dead man's silence. Now it held 2 cups, 3 open account books, and 1 vase of daffodils Jane insisted made a proper married room. On the desk lay her first eulogy, unfolded at last, the crease marks smoothed by repeated reading. Elias came in behind her, loosened his cravat, and watched as she lifted a pen. Her hand did not shake. She wrote 1 new line at the bottom of the old page. He learned that tenderness, once spoken aloud, is not a weakness to punish but a home to keep. She sanded the ink, blew it clear, and set the page to dry in candlelight, steady, unblotted, entirely her own.